So I've had this MacBook Pro for about a month, maybe a month and a few days, and I think it's finally fun to give you guys my take on this M1 Max 14-inch MacBook Pro, sponsored by dbrand. First things first, we have to talk about its slight redesign. The 14-inch is definitely a lot thicker than previous MacBook Pros. It reminds me of the older iBooks or PowerBooks of the past where it's kind of squared off, but this one kind of merges the two since it's kind of squared off but rounded off at the same time. And it also weighs a little bit more than the 13-inch MacBook Pro at 3.5 pounds, but it's lighter than my previous 16-inch MacBook Pro, so for me, I love the more portable form factor and travel-friendly weight. Now, if you're wondering why my MacBook's got a different color top, I'm actually using a skin from dbrand, which is their mellow yellow color. I was gonna opt in for that classic sunrise orange look, but I've already done that in the past and figured I should switch things up. So if you want to go ahead and customize the look of your new MacBook Pro or any of your iPhones, Pixels, tablets, go ahead and click that first link down below or go to dbrand.com/heymarkel. Now, the keyboard on this new MacBook Pro also feels a little bit different than the other MacBook Pros in the past. It feels so much better, there's more travel in each press, and the new matte black paint is a really nice touch too. Now that Apple finally replaced the touch bar, we now have that good old function keys back in action, but I noticed a few days after unboxing the laptop that they replaced a few of the keyboard shortcuts that I was familiar with from previous MacBook Pros. They added shortcuts for Spotlight, Dictation, and Do Not Disturb mode, the latter which I almost use every single day. But the first two shortcuts, not so much. So Apple basically replaced the keyboard's brightness controls with these two new shortcuts. So if you want to change the keyboard's brightness on the fly, you're going to have to go through Control Center and change the keyboard's brightness there, which is just extra clicks versus tapping it on the keyboard. Not a fan of this change, so let me know what you guys think about this change in the comments. Now, the speakers on this 14-inch MacBook Pro are so good. It sounds a little bit more fuller with better low ends than the 16-inch MacBook Pro that I had. It also doesn't distort at max volume, which is honestly just perfect for watching movies or videos on. And that new studio microphone sounds even better than before too, which, fun fact, I'm actually using to voice over this entire video with. Kind of crazy, right? Okay, before we move on to its insane performance, let's quickly talk about this display. The 14-inch liquid Retina XDR display just looks incredible. It's definitely one of the nicest displays that I've ever seen on a laptop, and I don't think there's a laptop out there that I can think of that can compete with this right now. The ProMotion 120Hz refresh rate is also pretty neat. I love the smooth animations throughout the OS, and moving windows or just scrolling through articles or my Final Cut timeline just feels a lot smoother, which I appreciate. But after a couple of weeks of using the laptop, you kind of forget that you have ProMotion, which also happened with my iPhone 13 Pro. You kind of just forget that it's there, which isn't a bad thing, but every now and then you will start to notice it again, especially if you're using a laptop without a high refresh rate display. Now, that notch up top can be a little jarring at first, but just like when we first got the notch on the iPhone 10, you slowly just forget about it, and I actually use an app called Top Notch, which basically just blacks out your entire menu bar, and there you go, the notch disappears. Now, I personally don't have an issue with it, but if you have a ton of things on the menu bar, then you may run into some problems, but me personally, I don't really care. So the M1 Pro and M1 Max are obviously Apple's most powerful chips on any of their computers. When I was watching the keynote, all I could think about was how crazy fast these machines are going to be with all the numbers that they showed off during the keynote, and boy, they did not disappoint whatsoever. So I'm a heavy Final Cut Pro user and I use that as my everyday tool, but I also use some of Adobe's creative apps like Photoshop and After Effects, which are still in beta for M1, but just a couple of weeks ago, they now support M1, M1 Pro, and M1 Max. Now, I'm not editing full-length movies or short films by any means, but when I tell you that I can cut through 4K 10-bit A7S III footage with some Fuji X-T4 H.265 footage in Final Cut Pro with motion VFX and not have it render at all and still be able to play that back in real time, that's something I was never able to do on any machine that I had before. As an example, my Pixel 6 Pro review, which is almost 9 minutes long with color grading, text tracking effects, and other assets, exported in just 4 minutes and 38 seconds, which is bonkers, and that's with the laptop unplugged. Now, I use a ton of motion VFX plugins for my videos. I use it for color grading, adding small text effects, text tracking, or callouts, and all of it just works so well with the M1 Max. On my old 16-inch MacBook Pro, I'd have to let it sit there and render first before I can actually play it back in real time, which can get really annoying if you have tight deadlines. Now, if you do want to check out some of the plugins that I use every day for my videos, I'll leave a link down below so you can check them out as well. My favorites would have to be MFilm Looks, MChannel, and MTuber 2, which are my go-to go-to plugins for my YouTube videos. They can be resource intensive, but with the M1 Pro and M1 Max, it eats through it like it's nothing. Now, when it comes to Photoshop or After Effects, I mean, I don't do a lot of heavy intensive graphics work anymore, but when I do have to make custom graphics for my videos or for work, I can't stress enough how fast I can export them and plug them right into Final Cut Pro. It's almost instantaneous for After Effects. It's just really great, honestly. Now, I haven't tried gaming on the M1 Max, but I have seen it run a few games really well. I don't really plan on gaming on my MacBook Pro anytime soon, since this is strictly just for making content, but if there's ever a time I really want to game and I only have my MacBook Pro with me, I can always download Apple Arcade games or Diablo 2 or 3, which runs on Rosetta, and I honestly really just enjoy playing those types of games anyways. But for more AAA games, I have my gaming PC at home and my Razer Blade 14 for that. Alright, let's talk about battery life real quick before we wrap up this video. Now, coming from a maxed out 16-inch MacBook Pro with an Intel i9 processor with the highest end graphics card and 64 gigs of RAM, using that laptop without being plugged in was pretty annoying to say the least. I couldn't even get 2.5 hours on battery if I was editing in Final Cut Pro, so traveling with that laptop, you almost always have to be plugged in, which was terrible on an airplane. Now, even though my machine, the M1 Max with the 32-core GPU, uses a lot more power in terms of battery life, it honestly still feels like an improvement for me. If I'm just watching movies or YouTube videos, doing some emails, writing scripts, or web browsing in general, I can easily use a laptop for about 8, maybe 9 hours with the brightness at 50%, which is honestly really solid for such a powerful laptop like this. Now, when it comes to editing videos without being plugged in, I was able to edit in Final Cut Pro for about 4.5 to 5 hours straight before hitting that 10% mark, and that's with some Photoshop and After Effects work too, which yet again is a really solid improvement over my 16-inch MacBook Pro. So yeah, battery even on the maxed out M1 Max in my opinion is really good. However, if you want more out of your laptop in terms of battery, then you may want to just look into the M1 Pro instead, or get the M1 Pro 16-inch MacBook Pro to get the best battery life. Okay, so in conclusion, the new M1 Max MacBook Pro is worth that hefty price tag that I paid for in my opinion. While yes, it might be overkill for what I do, at least I have a machine that I can use for years and years that will be faster than most desktop computers or laptops. Plus, I'm sure in the many years to come, more developers are going to optimize for M1 Max that'll make performance even better, so I'm really looking forward to that. Now, if you want to know whether you should pick up the M1 Pro or M1 Max, just figure out your budget first, and also ask yourself, are you going to keep this laptop for at least 3 years or more? Are you going to do a lot of work that uses a ton of GPU power? Only you will be able to answer that, but from what I've read online and what I've seen personally, you can't really go wrong with either version. These will be much faster than the machine you're working with right now, and I guarantee you won't be disappointed. If you are, then you can thumbs the video down if you want and sound off in the comments. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and yeah, I'll hopefully see you all before the new year.